Thanks to Edward Snowden and Glenn Greenwald, we now know that British and US intelligence agencies are systematically employing duplicitous tactics to subvert the work of online activists. There are no signs of any acknowledgement by David Cameron's government that things are going badly wrong at GCHQ, even though his US counterpart says he will be restructuring America's mass surveillance program run by the NSA. Jesslyn Radak, Edward Snowden's lawyer, is herself a whistleblower who exposed wrongdoings at the FBI. Tom Drake was charged under the US Espionage Act for exposing the NSA's Trailblazer program used to monitor the internet. Both say that close collaboration between the US and UK secret services under the so-called Five Eyes Agreement has meant that the end now justifies the means, and they claim that authorities on both sides of the Atlantic are more concerned about putting up smokescreens to carry on spying on their populations. With me is Jesslyn Radak, formerly with the Department of Justice in the United States, and Tom Drake, formerly with the National Security Agency. Welcome, both of you. Let's begin, Tom, with the legacy of the so-called Five Eyes program in terms of how we understand cooperation between US and UK intelligence agencies today.
Well, it's an extraordinary partnership, and the primary partnership exists between the United States and the United Kingdom. That was a special relationship formed shortly after World War II. It's called the UK-USA Agreement, and it's primarily focused on signals intelligence as well as other cooperative arrangements. And it's an extremely close partnership.
And did you understand it, I mean, talking about it from the Second World War, do you understand it as a sort of project for empire formulated in the 1940s, or is it not imperialism in that way?
Well, it's one way to say it is that, you know, they did have said historically the sun never set in the British Empire. I would just say it went underground, and recognizing that it had become the American century, but particularly in the post-World War II era, this was an agreement that continued many of the extraordinary accesses around the world that the former British Empire had enjoyed.
And when you were at NSA, you were very aware of the cooperation, as opposed to cooperation with the other three powers within that project.
Right, it's Five Eyes, but clearly there's really the two eyes of the US and the UK is essentially one organization effectively. And I was intimately familiar with GCHQ, visited there several times myself.
And so, as a person of the Department of Justice, would you have known about these kinds of projects? I mean, I know that was released. Eventually, we knew about that secret program.
No, we didn't. I mean, there was a small part of justice that dealt with Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, but certainly I think most Americans were unaware of NSA, no such agency, never say anything, unaware of the agency, and certainly unaware of the close cooperation with GCHQ.
And you, Tom, faced 35 years in prison under Espionage Act charges. The Prime Minister here keeps saying that the mass surveillance program is good, but part of your case was about how difficult it is to use trailblazer data, as it were. If you just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I was charged with espionage for holding up the mirror to the government, for speaking truth to enough power, and there was three primary areas. One was just intelligence failures, including 9/11. Also, massive fraud, waste, and abuse, which include the Trailblazer program, which is supposed to catapult NSA into the 21st century in terms of the digital age. And the third one was the secret surveillance programs, the mass surveillance programs, which I was eyewitness to at the very beginning.
But interestingly, when it comes to intelligence about 9/11 and how they messed up, as it were, the mass surveillance didn't actually help. I mean, your point being that it actually confuses the issue.
Yes, because you simply create a bigger haystack, which means every straw in the haystack is a potential needle. And it becomes a pathological hoarding complex. You just need all the data, just in case, as an insurance policy. So far beyond the stated purpose of going after real threats to national security or to a global order.
So why do you think the Prime Minister and President Obama say it is necessary and it does help?
They want to preserve the program.
Why?
Well, I have an answer to that too.
Go ahead,
I think information, in this age, information is the currency of power. And power,
even though it doesn't help power,
is a coin of the realm, but still having power of information on innocent people, that is power over people. They've even admitted that. We can blackmail Muslims by gathering data on their porn habits. Even though they have admitted in terms of But thwarting terrorist attacks, this kind of mass bulk collection doesn't help. It hasn't stopped a single one. The only one that it may have stopped could have been stopped in other ways. But they continue to collect the information. And I do think that is all about control of citizenry and keeping populations at bay.
I mean, you fought for due legal process back then in the first terrorism case after 9/11. Do you see many changes? You were stopped at Heathrow, of course. How do they target people, regardless of what you revealed about the FBI?
Well, I think in terms of terrorism prosecutions, they have kept those to a minimum in terms of the federal courts and have been trying many different incarnations of military commissions. In terms of my coming into Heathrow, I was very surprised to be questioned about who I represent and why I travel to certain places to meet with them, and digging into attorney-client privileged information, because in the U.S. that is protected, and UK recognizes attorney-client privilege too. But to the extent that a number of American journalists and attorneys have been experiencing border problems in the US, in the UK, in Germany, that is a greater problem, because it's cracking down on people who are dissenting, which is protected supposedly in the United States by the First Amendment.
And as you said, there's a constitution over there. How is your understanding of the way the legal framework works in terms of the Department of Justice over there and perhaps the justice system here, because we don't have the amendments you have?
Well, that's one of the reasons I find the NSA's close cooperation with GCHQ troublesome, because we do have a constitution that normally, under the Fourth Amendment, that prohibits illegal searches and seizures, you were not allowed to spy on Americans without a warrant. And the mass bulk data collection program does exactly that. The kinds of spying on people also denies them any kind of due process. If you're spying on innocent people and trying to figure out whether they're a criminal based on the idea that they might commit a future crime, there are huge First Amendment freedom of speech and association. That comes up if you're gathering metadata on people. That reveals everyone I called, how long I spoke to them, how often I spoke to them. And people say, well, it's just metadata. So, I mean, the US operates under a whole set of constitutional protections that the UK doesn't have. And whether you think that's good or bad, I mean, if they're in close cooperation, it's because the U.S. has abandoned those constitutional principles with these bulk surveillance programs.
So when, Tom, you were collaborating with the GCHQ when you were at the NSA, is that something you were aware of, what Jesslyn is saying, that they could circumvent the U.S. Constitution by employing the British intelligence services?
Well, that's precisely what's occurred, particularly since 9/11. You have the special arrangement.
You don't think it happened before?
I believe it happened, but nowhere near the scope and scale that it happened and was enabled after 9/11. It makes it very convenient when you have a foreign partner with that kind of relationship to essentially do extra constitutional activities. Because GCHQ also has other kinds of access that the NSA does not traditionally enjoy, having access to that and letting that partner share with you gives you enormous leverage in terms of the additional information you need.
Just that when you were talking about John Walker Lind, that's nothing in a way as compared to how we now know suspects are treated.
Exactly. Well, that touched more on one of the first people, an American, who was tortured after 9/11. He was our first American detainee captured in the war with Afghanistan. And he was a precursor and foreshadowed a lot of what we later saw at Abu Ghraib, when he was blindfolded and duct taped to a board with a bullet in his leg and bound and gagged and put in a coffin for days. That foreshadowed the torture regime. But in terms of surveillance and in terms of the way I was treated as a whistleblower, you know, look, I was a subject of a leak investigation. I got put on the no-fly list. I was referred to the bars where I'm licensed as a lawyer, but at least I never got indicted. So when I decided later in my career that I would dedicate my life to representing whistleblowers, when Tom Drake got indicted, I knew we had crossed the Rubicon. And I was hoping his case was a one-off, but instead, now we're up to 7, 8 people who have been indicted for the Espionage Act is meant to go after spies, not whistleblowers, and they're being indicted for telling the truth, for committing the truth.
But then, Tom, when you exposed things that contravene the U.S. Constitution, you must have been aware that they'd target you, and you were aware of the ways that they would target you. So, I mean, what protections would you possibly put in place if they can target people in the way they target?
The protections that exist, they simply
plans.
violated. I mean, this is what's so egregious. I had all
Weren't
kinds.
you frightened, though, that you knew how the way they target people?
Yes.
Albeit that it changed.
And I
after
myself was
9/11.
on the receiving end of that. See, this has become a zero-sum game. It's the end justifies the means. It doesn't. Obviously, there's real threats to national security. There's real threats in terms of global order. This goes far beyond that. This means under that guise, under that rubric, we're just going to collect it all wherever possible, just in case. In my case, they threw everything they had. I mean, the full weight of the U.S. government was placed on my head. They used all their surveillance that was available to them domestically.
But they didn't use honey traps, for instance, which the Snowden revelations have been explaining in terms of GCHQ specifically. What
That's part of
stopped you from fearing this a complete disaster of all
Well,
manner of
the truth be
security
told,
states?
they actually used relationships that I had with people against me and manufactured and framed evidence. When their case was collapsing, they made it very, very personal, and I can't reveal the full extent of those details because that's under seal in the court. But the government goes to a long ways. If they have, like they did in my case and others, many, many years to examine everything there is to know about you, there's an awful lot they can find out. And if they don't get the evidence they want, they'll make it up or recast it in a way that makes you look bad. Look, I was simply declared an enemy of the state. I was turned into a really, really bad guy, and they wanted to send the most chilling of messages.
Well, obviously, Jesslyn, we don't want this whole conversation with Tom and you to stop whistleblowing. I mean, how do you persuade people of the Government Accountability Project to come forward when they know exactly what's going to happen?
You know, strangely, the strange effect is that the more that they've cracked down in a really draconian way on the most visible person right now, who is Edward Snowden, the more whistleblowers we've had coming through the door. But Edward Snowden studied other whistleblower cases and knew that if he went through every proper channel, the channels that are available, like Tom did, you would be charged with espionage. Not only would you get no redress, but you would get charged. So I think he made his decisions accordingly. And I think if the U.S. really gives a damn about leaking, the best way to stop leaks is to have meaningful and effective whistleblower protection. But it denies whistleblower protection to national security and intelligence employees, who are the ones who I would argue most need it.
Tom Drake, Jesslyn Radek, thank you.
Thank you.